Good morning. It's great to be back in Tampa Bay, and we are excited that we're making huge progress on the issue of enforcing laws against illegal immigration. Imagine that. Not many states are doing, in fact, no state is doing even close to what Florida's doing, but what we've been doing has not only been effective, it's really been a model for the rest of the country. I'm joined here by our FHP and Highway Safety Motor Vehicle Executive Director Dave Kerner, our immigration czar Larry Keefe, Florida Highway Patrol Sergeant Joshua Malloy, and then State Senator Jay Collins. Is this your district right here where we're at? Yeah. From Tampa is doing a great job. So we appreciate everybody. We have been working very hard on this issue for a number of years. When I first became governor, Florida allowed sanctuary cities, believe it or not. And I was like, no, we're not going to allow sanctuary cities. So we worked with the legislature to ban sanctuary cities. I think that was back in 2019. We also worked to continue to add solid policy in that respect. But it really became difficult when Joe Biden took office at the beginning of 2021, because he had basically campaigned on not enforcing the border at all. And I remember they had a debate, should someone that comes illegally raise your hand if you think they should be, like, no one was even raising their hand during that. And so it was a very radical posture, because we can have debates about immigration, what levels of immigration, what types. I look at some types of immigration, some that are even legal, like these H-1Bs, and that's a racket, right? I mean, you can see that. So, I think that I'm a critic of that. Some other people like it. We can have these debates about all these things, but clearly, there has to be rules of the road. Clearly, the people of the U.S. have the right to determine who comes in or who doesn't come in to our country. And clearly, you've got to have enforcement about those rules so that people realize that you're not going to be able to violate them with impunity. And basically, the Biden administration just threw all that by the wayside. So we were faced with a situation in Florida. People would say, oh, well, you're not a border state. Why do you care? Why are you? Well, first of all, a lot of these people crossing the border wanted to come to Florida. That's why I cared. Second of all, it's just wrong to have the open border. And that has fentanyl, that has a whole host of things that affected all states, particularly in the continental U.S. So we were the first state to send people at the southern border to help Texas. And what we found was our state law enforcement agencies, a lot of these people coming illegally were saying they wanted to come to Florida. I mean, it was documented that it wasn't just like 5%. It was 25, 30, 40%, depending on when you were finding these folks. And so we knew that that was going to be an issue. And so we did that, and we were proud of doing that. But we also knew we had to do more in the way of legislation. And so a couple years ago, we passed strong E-Verify provisions. We are now the leading state by far in usage of E-Verify. So what E-Verify does is it's already against the law to work here if you're not authorized to be here. That's true federally, that's true state. But people can come, who knows what documents, they could forge documents. Some people get hired without documents. But E-Verify, you have to run everything through, right? And it's very easy, it's no burden, but that will ping if somebody is not authorized to work. And so it's a disincentive for people to want to come to Florida to work illegally. And we've had more usage than any other state by far. Now, we're one of the biggest states, but we're not even close to as big as California or Texas, and we have way more than any state even close. And so that was positive. That wasn't enough, but when you look at this stuff, yes, having a wall, I'm supportive of that. I'm supportive of securing the southern border. I think the Trump administration's done a great job in the first 100, 120 days, however long they've been in, on doing that. But you also know that there's enticements that cause people to want to come. With Biden, the enticements were very strong, because literally you show up at the border, even if you got caught, they'd hand you a notice to appear in some court like a year and a half later and then just go on your way. Well, of course people, are going to do that. And if you go to California, you get all the benefits funded by taxpayers, or New York or Illinois or some of these other places. So these enticements are something that, so the E-Verify to say, no, we don't want to be a magnet with employment. in the state of Florida for people who aren't authorized to be here and for people who are working illegally. You know, people say, oh, I see these, you know, what about like farms, all this stuff? They actually have worker programs that are authorized. You could critique those, and there may be flaws in those too, but you do have that, and people do utilize it. Now, if it's a legal program, a lot of times you pay more for that labor than you would if someone's totally off the books, so that's where you get that. But the idea that you can't have folks working on that is just not factually true based on what's going on. We also understood that how are you going to position yourself vis-a-vis illegal immigration? In California, as I said, you get benefits. We don't give benefits. You get driver's license there and ID cards. We refuse to do driver's licenses for illegal aliens. In fact, we did legislation saying not only no driver's license, not only no ID cards from state or local governments, but no ID cards from these NGOs and these nonprofits. They were trying to issue ID cards to kind of give the appearance that these folks had a right to be in this country when they didn't. So that was the most sweeping set of reforms that anyone did anywhere in the country. We also required hospitals to collect and report the health care costs for people who are here illegally. I think as most people know, federal law, if someone shows up to the emergency room, they have a requirement to render whatever care. And, you know, there are people, unfortunately, who use the emergency room for basically primary care. So you end up having a lot of costs imposed. But since we did that reporting, you know, the amount of money that's gone for illegal aliens showing up to the emergency room has declined dramatically. And it's just because we've sent the message that we're serious about this. We've also done things like transportation out of Florida or out of different non-sanctuary states. And you saw Texas sent to New York City, to Chicago. We sent to California, and even beautiful Martha's Vineyard. Imagine that. Like, you know, they were advertising themselves to be this great sanctuary jurisdiction. They said, you know, they condemned President Trump during his first administration because they said everyone's welcome, no humans illegal. They would pass resolutions, they do all this stuff. And then they had 50. You know, these border towns are poor in Texas. They get thousands and thousands. Martha's Vineyard, very wealthy, they got 50, and all hell broke loose. Like, they refused that. They called out the National Guard. They went and got those folks off that island very quickly. Yet these are people that were advocating for open borders. They just didn't want those open borders and the consequences that to be applied to them in their daily lives. And so the transportation really, I think, raised the threshold of the issue with the public, and people started to pay a lot more attention as a result of those programs. So we were leading on that. We also understand, people say, you're not a border state. We're a maritime state. We've got people that will take boats illegally, wash up on shore in the Florida Keys or in Jupiter or some of these places. Not as much on the west coast of Florida, that's true. It's mostly the Keys and then southeastern Florida. But this stuff is really serious. So we launched Operation Vigilant Sentry, and part of it was we were mindful of what was going on in Haiti. There's always problems in Haiti, but there was a time when people were really fleeing. Our Department of Emergency Management, we created rescue flights. We rescued a lot of people to come out of Haiti who were Americans. There were a lot of missionaries there, others that were there, and we were happy to do that. But people were fearing just a massive exodus. And I remember reports, oh, Florida's going to get overrun and everything like that. Well, no, we surged our maritime assets, even when Biden was president, to work alongside the Coast Guard. And since we did that, we've gotten interdicted and repatriated, just with the state efforts alone, 18,000 illegal aliens. Some of these boats, they'll have drugs, they'll have guns, you know, a lot of military-age males trying to come. Not something that we want to be seeing in Florida, just a bunch of, you know, to have 30 military-age males show up on the shore of the Florida Keys from like Haiti or something. That's not what we want. So that's been really good. And then now, since the Trump administration's been back in, they've had better presence off the coast of Florida. And we've got great radar, so there's been a huge amount of work that's gone into that, and I think it's been really, really successful in terms of what we've done. Now, which brings us to where we've been now in the last couple months. I think most people remember that in January, I called the special session of the Florida legislature to make sure that Florida was leading in efforts to assist the Trump administration with enforcement of immigration laws. And the reason for that is simple. You can't, when Biden, he let in 7-8 million alone. You have many millions more than that. You are not going to be able to make even a dent in that with just random ICE agents that are sprinkled around the country. And oh, by the way, with an agency that's been decimated since Biden was president. He decimated the interior enforcement. So we viewed the state and locals to have a huge role in helping make sure that this policy vision was realized, that what the voters voted for that they would get, that you would actually have these immigration laws enforced. That not only will help relieve burdens on communities, on schools, on healthcare, on criminal justice, but it also is a major deterrent for people trying to come illegally in the first place. And so it helps slow that flow down for folks who are trying to come across our southern border or even doing things like visa overstays. So we proposed a package of reforms that were the strongest in the country. Most important was probably, and like, look, the state didn't need this because I told our agencies, you got to do it, but we required state and local law enforcement agencies all across Florida, municipal, county, and state, to participate with federal immigration enforcement efforts. And that usually takes the form of these things called 287G agreements, which is basically an agreement with a local agency or a state agency to be part of these operations. We call it a task force model. And so you see some of the things that have happened recently, which I'll talk about, that gets integrated, and that ends up being a real force multiplier for that. Now, I had my agencies do it anyways, even without the legislation, but we still wanted to make sure that everyone was on the team. So that was one. The other one was we wanted to make it a state offense for someone to come into Florida illegally, especially people that have been deported previously. And we structured that a little bit different than what Texas did because we knew that it would get challenged in court. And yeah, they found a judge, but this is on appeal. There'll be a lot of things that happen about that. And I think ultimately we'll be vindicated. But we need to give tools to our own state law enforcement. I mean, you can't have a situation where if you have another president that views his role like Biden to not enforce the law, that somehow states are left defenseless and we can't do anything. I mean, think about this. What these people will say is the Constitution has a supremacy clause, and when the federal government's acting in accordance with the enumerated powers in the Constitution, that trumps what states want to do. And that's true as far as it goes. And so they say immigration is just about federal. Now, that would make sense if the feds were trying to enforce the law and the states were trying to sabotage that, then yes, supremacy clause, right? You can't pass legislation that goes against what federal law is on an issue that the federal government has constitutional jurisdiction over. But that's actually not how they choose to apply that. In fact, it's the opposite. These same people who say states shouldn't be enforcing immigration law because it undermines the federal government's authority in this matter, they don't care that you have sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. Biden never did anything against sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, not at all. They thought that was fine. Those are all their folks that were doing it. So somehow this is developed. It's kind of like a heads they win, tails they lose. You know, if you have a president like Biden, he won't enforce immigration law. And then if the states step up and say, no, we are going to take federal immigration law and we are going to make sure that's upheld in our state, they'll say, oh, you can't do that. It violates the supremacy clause. But on the flip side, if you have a president like President Trump who says, no, you know what, we got to enforce the laws on the books. We want to make sure that the people that are here lawfully. But then you have San Francisco or Los Angeles or California or some of these places that are sanctuary jurisdiction, then some of these same people will say, oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. They can be sanctuary. You can't have your cake and eat it too. I mean, if it's okay for a state to try to sabotage the federal government's policies, which I don't think it is, But clearly, it's got to be okay for a state to try to vindicate the federal government's policies. This is what Congress enacted. Just because Biden wasn't fulfilling his oath of office, that doesn't mean that we can't step up. So I think that's really important. That's more of a long-term play. I think you're going to see the courts have to come to a different resolution than what this one district judge has done. But you know, this raises the issue of these judges that have just gotten out of control in this country. They think that they can set policies for the entire country. Having one district judge in one pocket of the United States of America, you do not have the power to issue edicts that apply nationwide. It's just not the way our constitutional system was designed. So you'll have people that will bring cases. You can go to Hawaii or California or wherever, find one judge to say something that the Trump administration is doing is unlawful, and then they will issue an order saying this applies nationwide. The federal government must cease any of this. That is not the way courts are supposed to operate. Courts have authority under Article 3 of the Constitution to decide cases and controversies, the parties before them. So you can bring a suit, someone can defend it, a court can decide, and that binds the people that are parties to the case. You can't then say you're binding everyone in the United States based on one district judge. The U.S. Supreme Court has not been aggressive enough in policing this, and it's really caused, I think it's caused a crisis in the judiciary. I think it's caused a lack of credibility. I think the public looks at this, and that you can almost predict what some of these judges are going to do, regardless of the underlying law. And I think it's really undermined the authority of the courts. And the Supreme Court has the ability to reel that in. Justice Thomas has talked about not allowing these nationwide injunctions. I think there's been more nationwide injunctions in like the first 4 months of this year than there had been in the previous 4 years against the Biden administration. I mean, and they were doing things like, you know, unilaterally forgiving student loans. I mean, they were doing a lot of things, but it's just applied differently. So you have this one case in Florida where the judge said that somehow there was an issue with the statute that we passed, and then she's expecting our Attorney General to be ordering around law enforcement who weren't parties to the case that somehow they have to cease operations in certain areas. None of those people were parties to this case. You don't have the authority as a judge to bind people that are not before the court. That's that's way beyond what Article 3 empowers you to do. And so you can decide that case, and she decided it wrongly, but that applies to the parties before the case. It does not require the Attorney General to go out in every corner of the state to people that had nothing to do with that case and tell them that somehow they're not capable of enforcing the law. But that provision was something that's very important. We also cracked down on this catch and release. You know, you have illegals committing crimes, and Biden wouldn't take them, so they'd get released into society. We don't want that. We want people to be held. We don't think that they should get bail, particularly if they're committing serious criminal offenses. If ICE wants to take them, that's one thing, but just simply releasing them back in our community, that is a total non-starter. Unfortunately, you know, you have judges that will sometimes be very weak when it comes to setting bail conditions. We changed the law so that they have to consider some of these factors, and the public, I think, would probably have more recourse now if they didn't do it. So, and then we did other things in that bill. We got rid of another enticement. Before I became governor, Florida enacted in-state tuition rates for illegal aliens. That is inappropriate. Why would you be doing that? I mean, it's hard enough to get into our universities. Now, you know, when I was growing up here, like, people would view, like, I mean, if you were a halfway decent student, you got into almost every state university. You know, now it's very, very competitive. I mean, you look at University of Florida, incredibly competitive, USF, all these. So, first of all, why would we even be given spots? But then why would you be giving a tuition discount to somebody that's not even authorized to be here? You have people that live like across the Florida border, like St. Mary's, Georgia. Some of them, you know, their parents may work at like Mayport in Florida, right? So they're not technically Florida residents, and yet somehow they would have to pay full out-of-state tuition, but somebody whose parents aren't even lawfully here would get in-state tuition. It makes no sense. And so that was rolled back. Finally, we had worked very hard to do that. We've got to put Floridians first. We got to make sure we're standing up for our citizens. So that whole package was something that was really meaningful. You know, I'm glad we eventually got it done. But let's just remember that when I proposed this, we had the leadership in the Florida House reject doing anything on immigration enforcement. They said it was premature. They said the governor, we're the legislative branch, and the House of Representatives, we determine the governor has no role here, and they were saying all that stuff. Well, you know what? The voters did not like hearing that, because they're like, what are you waiting for? This is like what we've been waiting, this opportunity here to make good on this mandate after the 2024 election, and you're saying it can wait, or we don't need to do it? No, we needed to do it. And so I think they realized that they were in bad spot there. But rather than just do the right thing, they came up with, in the Florida House, this bill that would basically have made Florida a sanctuary jurisdiction. It eliminated everything I talked about that we have done. It eliminated all of that. It totally kneecapped the governor and state government. It would not allow the governor to be involved in any immigration enforcement whatsoever. In fact, local governments weren't even allowed to talk to ICE unless they got approval from a cabinet officer. It was really designed to sabotage immigration enforcement. Now, they named it the Trump Act, and I think they thought that people would be gullible enough to think that that meant it was a tough bill, but people saw right through it. They saw that it was a charade. You know, you can write a sanctuary bill, but just putting a red hat on it isn't going to make it anything other than a sanctuary bill. We're not fooled by that stuff. And so there was a real negative response. I know Jay Collins was very strong in the Senate in calling out what the House leadership was trying to do. And so that collapsed. And so finally, we're able to get these policies in place. And so what has that meant for us? All 67, and this would not have happened without our legislation, all 67 Florida sheriffs have entered into 287G agreements with Immigration and Custom Enforcement to be active participants in this mission. You look at our municipalities, many of them have entered into these agreements, and many more are on the way. So if you look nationwide at all the law enforcement agencies that have entered into 287G agreements with the federal government, more than half of them are in one state. Guess which state that is? State of Florida. So first of all, where's the cavalry? Why? I mean, I honestly thought when we did this that I thought other states would follow. I really did. Now, maybe the other states saw the House shenanigans, and maybe the message got a little muddled there for a while as they were trying. But we have over half of the law enforcement agencies in this country that are in this fight with those agreements are just in one state, the state of Florida. We're not the only red state in the country. And so we're leading. I think others really need to do more. So we've done that. So we've highlighted recently what's happened as a result of that. We have, with Operation Tidal Wave, worked with Immigration and Custom Enforcement. This was like, what, 4 or 5 day efforts, would you say? And we got over 1,100 illegal aliens across the state apprehended. MS-13, 18th Street Gang, Barrio Aztecas, Brown Pride Aztecas, Tren de Aragua, of course, one of the worst criminal organizations coming out of Venezuela, all represented in that. And you got a number of these people that were already under active deportation orders. I mean, you'll hear stuff about due process. Someone comes illegally, due process. Oh, first of all, I would just point out, when we typically talk about due process, we're talking about a criminal context, right? State can't deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's a bedrock. Immigration enforcement, indeed, that is not a punishment. It is not a criminal enterprise. If you're here and you're deported, that's considered, a civil action. Now, it is a crime to be in the state, to be in the country illegally, and you could do potentially a criminal trial to hold someone accountable. But if you're just simply removing them on the other side of the border, that does not mean the same due process that would attach to people that are brought up on criminal charges, obviously Americans, but even people that are here. It's not the same thing. But put that aside. However you come down on that, We have in Florida probably 70 to 80,000, maybe more, illegal aliens who've already gone through a lot of process, have already appeared before an immigration judge, and these aren't actual Article III judges, by the way, they're executive branch employees, and they've been ordered to be removed. Final orders of deportation issued. Why would we be discussing anything else at that point? Of course you have to follow that order. So there were a lot of people that were targeted in the tidal wave operation who were already under these orders. They don't even need to go through. Even if you want an O.J. Simpson trial for every illegal alien, which, by the way, you can't do, right? It's just implausible. And I think to myself, how did Clinton deport all these illegals? Hell, even Obama had a lot deported. Now, I know Obama, they changed the definition, so inflated his numbers. But like Clinton was in for 8 years, he deported like a couple million people. Did he give a trial to? You wouldn't be able to do that. So you got to be sensible about that. But when you have active orders of removal already done, well, there's nothing even more to debate at that point. And there's probably 800,000 to 1 million throughout the country that are under those similar orders. And so that was really successful operation. Now, what we're here today to announce and celebrate is Florida Highway Patrol is leading this effort all across the United States. There's not a single law enforcement agency that's gotten in this fight more deeply than our FHP troopers. And one, I wanted to thank them for that. Two, wanted to let folks know that this is really the model for what needs to be done all throughout the country. Now, when even before this legislation was passed, I had Dave Kerner negotiate the 287G agreement for FHP. We also had Florida Department of Law Enforcement and Florida Fish and Wildlife and our Florida State Guard that entered into similar agreements with the federal government. What this does, it's like you get law, what is 287G? Basically, it trains you in immigration, but then you have authority to act in the realm of immigration enforcement. When Biden was president, these guys pulled over an illegal driving drunk. They could call ICE, and ICE may want to come take them. How many times do you think ICE wanted to come when Biden was president? Not very often. So they could have done that, and now you probably get a better response, but that's not they don't have enough manpower. Well, now they are in a position to be able to handle these operations all the way until they're processed for deportation. And so earlier this week, we had more than 100 FHP troopers sworn in as special deputy U.S. Marshals, which is even over and above the 287G. That empowers state troopers to execute federal warrants and to remove dangerous criminal aliens from our communities. Now, as I mentioned, Operation Tidal Wave used Highway Patrol, FDLE, local law enforcement to great effect. What we have now with FHP is that they are able to conduct immigration operations wholly independent of the federal government. And there's no one else in the country where they're doing that. Now, Tidal Wave was a task force model where they were working in conjunction. These guys now at FHP, they can do operations, they can get illegals, and they can do everything that an immigration officer would do up until the point where they get processed for removal. Now, we've put plans on the table to say we can handle that too. In Florida, we've got the best emergency response and management capabilities in the country. You've seen swift responses after major hurricanes. I mean, we've had 6 in the last 7 years, but just think we had 2 this past year. We had a third that wasn't a major, but was still significant. And then in 2022, we had almost Category 5, basically a Category 5. Ian, 23, we had Idalia. And yet you can move, the logistics, everything that's done, we do that as good as anybody, but we can apply that to other things other than just disaster response. For example, during COVID, you had massive Delta wave. So they had these mRNA vaxes. They were telling you if you get that, you will not get COVID and COVID will end. And yet even after a lot of people were doing it, you created, the Delta came on the scene. And so, we had Delta and people are like, okay, and some of these people, obviously had vax and they were still getting it. And so we're like, all right, well, what about treatment? No one talks about treatment. It was like almost verboten to talk about treatment. So we did the Regeneron clinics, the monoclonal antibodies, and we helped thousands and thousands of people. And there were some people in pretty rough shape. They'd get the antibodies, and I mean, most all the time, they would get it cleared up. I mean, if you got it early enough, it was really, really effective. All those clinics were set up by our emergency management folks. I mean, literally, if there was a need for a clinic in Tampa, we could do it within usually 36 hours. We'd put Jacksonville. So we ended up having all these clinics. It was hugely successful, so much so that Biden took away our monoclonal antibodies after we had been doing this for 4 to 6 weeks, which was really, really problematic at the time, but that's what happened. So we used it there. We've also used it to rescue people from Israel after October 7th. We have a lot of Americans that go over there, and a lot of them are from Florida. We also have people who are Israeli American who live in Florida and are Florida residents, but also spend time there. And so we knew that there was a need for that. Federal government was kind of dragging its feet. So we brought back, I mean, like 900 people from Israel. First flight landed in Tampa, not too far from here. So we're versatile with that, and so we have a plan on the table if the feds approve, where we can take some of the military judge advocates, let them act as immigration judges. We can do makeshift detention space, and then even do transportation. I mean, honestly, it's easier to fly somebody to Central America than it probably was to Martha's Vineyard anyways, and so we can do that too. So this can be soup to nuts for us. We want to be in the fight. We want to help. But clearly, what Highway Patrol is doing is they are more active in this sphere than anywhere else in the country. And this is something that's really, really important. And if you think about it, I've met a lot of angel moms who've lost kids because of illegal aliens, and especially when they lose them in like car accidents. So many times the illegal driver had other infractions, driving drunk, reckless driving, all this other stuff. And if you think about it, had we had these policies in place with the federal government that would actually take the problem seriously then, and this is long before I was governor, most of these cases, some of this stuff would never have happened at all. So you're saving lives, you're really making a difference in your community. So to be able to do standalone operations, I think is really, really significant. We're excited about what they've done, but our plan that's on the table will serve, if implemented, if approved by the feds, as a major force multiplier. We've already leading the country way over and above what anyone else is doing, but this will show how it's done. It'll show these things, in fact, can be done. So I want to thank Larry Keefe, who helped develop this. I also want to thank Kevin Guthrie from our Division of Emergency Management, who was involved in putting it together and would also be really spearheading the execution of this. We've made a difference. No state has done more to make a difference. The state's safer as a result of what these guys have done. Taxpayers are better off as a result of what these guys done, and all of our services and everything are better as a result of what these guys have done. So thank you for what you've done. We are going to continue to push forward, and I truly believe that the best is yet to come. Okay, Dave Kerner.
Thank you, Governor. My name is Dave Kerner. I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles. And all of the success that the Governor just talked about, I just want to take a break from what I had written down and emphasize two things. First of all, the men and women in uniform behind me, these state troopers, they're not paid enough. We see the governor fighting for that. We see Senator Collins and the Senate really step up. But I'll tell you what law enforcement officers really appreciate beyond good equipment and good pay. And honestly, it's great leadership. And when these men and women put on their uniform, they know that they're going to work out in dangerous conditions with a governor and by extension an executive director that has their back and appreciates what these men and women in uniform do. And that is why these men and women behind me are so successful in apprehension of illegal immigrants and all the law enforcement duties that they do. It's because Governor DeSantis has their back, and we appreciate that, Governor. So if we could give the governor and these troopers a round of applause, thank you. It's an honor to join the governor along with Director Larry Keefe and Master Sergeant Josh Malloy. We have Senator Collins here as well, who's been just an outstanding leader on law enforcement, immigration in the Florida Senate. We appreciate what's going on right now, and we appreciate you standing strong with our troopers and our law enforcement officers. We have General Hartzell here as well. Thank you for being here, General. I know you appreciate those comments about good leadership. And then, of course, Sergeant Josh Malloy and his CIU team, outstanding law enforcement officers here today. And we're privileged to give an update on our immigration and enforcement operations in the state of Florida. As Governor DeSantis has pointed out, Florida leads by multiples and multiples in terms of enforcement, but it's not just enforcement. In just over 4 months, state law enforcement has stood up a highly effective force of investigative, of enforcement, logistical, and transportation elements, far outpacing any other state in the nation. The Florida Highway Patrol was the first in the nation to be delegated federal enforcement authorities in the immigration space, and we now have over 1,800 state troopers that have been credentialed and delegated federal immigration enforcement authority. What that means is if you see a state trooper, he or she has federal authorities to detain, investigate, apprehend, and deport. We have troopers in all 67 counties of this great state that have that authority. The only troopers that do not have that authority, as I understand, are the men and women that are on military leave or out on sick leave. And when they come back, we will get them credentialed right away. Most recently, Florida Highway Patrol has executed on several independent operations utilizing their independent federal authority that has yielded unprecedented apprehensions of illegal immigrants, many with significant criminal histories, prior deportations, and allegiances to transnational narco cartels and gangs. To date, we have assisted or been the primary arresting agency on over 1,020 illegal immigrants. But with our federal partners, we are doing more than just making apprehensions. We are innovating and we are expanding upon techniques, databases, processes, and ultimately creating a state-led enforcement arm that can amplify the capacity for apprehensions by several multiples of what already exists. We are creating a model, in our belief, that can be exported to other 49 states in the United States. For example, we have worked with DOJ at the Department of Homeland Security to waive user fees for the Systematic Alien Verification and Entitlements Program, which is also known as SAVE. This is the database that law enforcement and states use to verify lawful presence in the United States. To waive those fees was a very big deal. It's about $30 million just here in the state of Florida because of the governor's leadership, because of the negotiations that we've successfully accomplished with DOJ and the Department of Homeland Security. Those savings and that access on the roadside for a law enforcement officer will be felt and seen and utilized nationwide. We are integrating technology so that troopers and law enforcement officers on the road can have real-time access to alien status without any cost borne by the state or local agency. Much attention has been paid recently to an operation that Troop C Tampa Criminal Interdiction Unit team executed last Wednesday. This operation was featured on Fox nationally and revealed some of the success and capabilities that the Florida Highway Patrol has achieved as we continue to improve upon our operations. For example, CIU troopers, many of them standing behind me today, were able to apprehend 30 illegal immigrants in just over an hour. It is important, just for some clarification, the way that I view immigration enforcement are there are really two buckets of illegal immigrants. One are those that came across the border, whether they're seeking asylum or they had some sort of lawful presence given to them for a period of time. Those are what we call informally men and women that are on a list that we can go out and apprehend with final order of deportation. But there's a whole nother element to this where people cross the border, whether with good intentions or not, and oftentimes it was very bad intentions, that we don't even know who they are, we don't know where they live, we don't even know that they're here. And what we found is the type of techniques that the Border Patrol and now the Florida Highway Patrol are using on these operations is really allowing us to uncover the non-documented illegal immigrant in the United States and in the state of Florida. These folks live in the shadows. We don't know who they are, and I think personally that the men and women in the state of Florida have a right to know who is in their community. And by using these efforts and techniques, we are uncovering that shadow population. As the Florida Highway Patrol continues to expand our enforcement efforts throughout the state, so too will our ability to apprehend illegal immigrants. Without a commensurate growth in our ability to provide detention space, our enforcement efforts will be significantly restrained. On May 9th, 2025, President Trump issued a presidential proclamation pertaining to the self-deportation program. Section 3B directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to deputize no less than 20,000 state and local law enforcement officers to engage in enforcement and removal operations. For a scale, at over 1,800 state troopers deputized already, we right here in this room represent nearly a full 10% of the 20,000 officers nationwide that the President has set as a goal. Several other local and state agencies in Florida are due to be deputized in the near future. If there were ever a model of success and effectiveness in the immigration enforcement space, it is Florida, it is the Florida Highway Patrol, and we look forward to working with our federal government partners to enhance our detention and deportation capacities.
All right, Larry.
Good morning. What I want to do today is give you a progress report, a progress update on what you heard the governor mention, maybe Director Kerner mentioned it, but this operation plan, the Florida blueprint, the prototype, the archetype, what it is that we're doing in Florida. 37 pages of here's what we recommend for the country, here's what we recommend for the other states, that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. It is very fitting that we're here today at the Florida Highway Patrol Station, and I want to thank Director Kerner, Colonel Howes, for their effort, for their work, for what they've done, because they are truly at the tip of the spear of this effort. And the work that they have done thus far, I believe that you will see, for reasons that I'll talk more about in a moment, that within the next 60 days, according to the President of the United States, you will see what it is that you are doing is becoming this blueprint or this role model for the rest of the country. And within the next 60 days, the techniques, the methods, the things that you were just mentioning in your remarks will be the standard that our brother and sister states apply in the effort that we're going through here today. So just by way of a quick background so I can report to you the more recent developments of what's happened with the Florida blueprint. Everybody remembers about 100 days ago, about the time of President Trump's inauguration, he declared a national emergency and he issued an order saying, go secure the borders and restore our national sovereignty to the federal agencies. And he also said to the federal agencies, go out and these at least 15 million that came in during the Biden administration, go find them and mass deport them as soon as possible. 2 orders from the President of the United States. And I can't praise our federal partners enough that within 7 weeks, they had operational control of the border. That's just huge. We kind of skipped past that because we're moving to the mass deportation issue, the going and finding the illegal aliens embedded in our communities. But our borders have been secured in 7 weeks. That's just stunning. And I always want to make certain that I throw that out to our federal partners on that. But then attention focused on this mass deportation issue, where at least, just looking back 4 years, 15 million embedded in the heart of this country that needed to be found, identified. Where are they? They needed to be sorted because of all the complexities that you've seen coming up about due process and where they stand in terms of being amenable to deportation. So there's finding, there's sorting, and then there is the detention, deportation, and transportation. Huge logistics issue that the governor alluded to in terms of Florida skills learned in COVID, learning in the rescue from Americans in Israel post the Hamas terror attack, and what we do all the time with hurricanes. Those skills became in great value that I'll talk about in a moment. So our federal partners have to figure out where to start in this endeavor. And they need to find a state that they can rely on that has all of the right things to maximize the chances of success. Because for every 15 federal law enforcement officers in this country, there's 85 state and local law enforcement officers in this country. You need these force multipliers. It all depended on the force multipliers. The feds could have gone anywhere they wanted to any state they wanted, but they didn't have to look far, and it didn't take them too long. They needed to know a place where they had leadership that was bold, they had leadership that was decisive, they had leadership that was resolute, and they had leadership that was undauntable. And they knew where to find that. They wanted to see a state that did difficult, big things under stress, under risk, that didn't mind being the laboratory because you don't know how it's going to go. Well, they didn't have to look very far. They looked right to the state of Florida, and they chose us. Our federal partners, who we've come to know very, very closely, very intimately, are extremely under a lot of pressure. They have a tough boss. We have a tough, reliable boss. And they picked and they chose where they wanted to go to build their prototype to the state of Florida. So what did we do once they chose us? Well, we went all about developing cohesion and bonding, and anybody that's been part of anything, your son, Sergeant Malloy, and his baseball team, you can do a lot of talking about teamwork, working together, winning games, but what you've got to do is actually build that authentic, legitimate cohesion. So what did the state of Florida do? We went down and moved in with the feds in Miami in an operations center down there. And this is in early February. And we have stayed there since, forming these relationships. And it is that environment, that incubator laboratory environment, where the genius of not only our law enforcers, our FDLE, our Highway Patrol, our State Guard, our Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, all wonderful folks, but everybody thinks of this as a law enforcement operation. But as we became embedded with our federal partners, I came to see it as that. You have to be able to find them and sort them legally as to who you can take and not take and deport. It was a huge logistics issue. It was like another hurricane. It was like dealing with the COVID crisis. It was all of these things, and where the true genius in Florida lies, not to the disparagement of any of our law enforcement, but in terms of world-class genius, is the Florida Department of Emergency Management and the Florida National Guard. World-class, the best of the best at safely moving people, logistics, transportation, because this whole mass deportation is all about doing it at scale in large numbers. So all of that resulted in this operation that you heard the governor mention, you heard Director Kerner mention about 2 weeks ago, Operation Tidal Wave. That was kind of the test run. It was a warm-up. How do we test this prototype to see whether this whole concept that we have worked? And we got to, and it went great. It went well. We are told by our federal partners that ICE set an all-time historical record for the number of arrests of illegal aliens within a week. And Governor, we weren't even at it but 4 days. So that went well. I'm not trying to diminish Operation Tidal Wave, but Florida was kind of like a pushy partner. We can do more. We can do more. We have more capacity, we have more capability, and we can be right at the table in the solutions, the problem-solving phase. So, so 1 week ago, I met with the governor, and he's, Larry, where is all of this? And I said, sir, there's lots of meetings, there's lots of conversations, there's lots of oral discussions about ways to attack this problem, and your team in Florida is at the forefront of it. And the upshot of that conversation was, we need to put it in writing. We need to put it somewhere. What are the skeleton of this thing that we're creating, this way forward, this model, this prototype, this way to do this? And that is this. And so Friday, a week ago, this is the Florida recommended operational plan that gets into some of the details, not all of them. We presented that to our federal partners at the highest levels and down to the leadership in the state here. And that was 1 week ago, this 37-page blueprint. Last Friday, as in 3 days ago, which I am calling Federal Friday, two things came out of the White House, out of the Trump administration, and our federal partners in this space. The first thing was that we were notified by the operational leadership at DHS that not only was Tidal Wave a great thing, and we might be doing the Tidal Wave operation or some variant of a named operation every so many weeks or so many months, and then it's back to normal, back to usual. We were told that Tidal Wave was so successful, and the trend or pattern for the state of Florida and what we're doing was such, that is the new normal. Operation Tidal Wave and more. Operation Tidal Wave is tied in conjunction with our federal partners. The operation that you just did 3 days ago is this 287G fully deputized federal agents able to go out there, run and operate and do the things that they do. But in terms of the federal partnership side of this, it is going to become what you saw in Tidal Wave, a persistent, permanent pressure that's tied to the voluntary relocation program. You've heard about reversing CBP-1 to CBP home and the voluntary deportation, to where, in order for that to work, this constant, permanent, persistent pressure is going to be the new normal here in the state of Florida. And for a reason I'm about to mention to you, the other thing that happened on last Friday, Federal Friday, was the President of the United States entered an executive order where he ordered that in not more than 60 days, this approach, strikingly similar to everything we're talking about in Florida, is going to be implemented and scaled nationally, not sometime in the future, but within, not later than 60 days, that is going to happen. The description of what that means in the executive order is that there will be an intensive campaign to remove illegal aliens who fail to deport voluntarily. And without getting ahead of the governor of the state of Florida, you can be looking for Florida's help and assistance in regard to voluntary deportation. Rather than go through the time, expense, and effort and all the drama of the involuntary deportation, Florida is likewise very much a part of the creative side of how do you do this and what will be the unique Florida ways to add to President Trump's voluntary removal campaign. Lastly, I want to talk about another law enforcement agency that is crucial to this effort and to the public, and of course to policymakers in the state of Florida. In this whole endeavor, mass deportation is quintessentially about numbers. It is how many do you begin with and how many are being deported or apprehended and detained pending deportation. How many are there to begin with and how many do you have along the way? The key Florida organization that is dealing with that issue is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Commissioner Mark Glass and his brilliant staff. Not only are they doing many, many things in regard to intelligence, working with collecting information, putting together the target packages, they do so many things. But in my view, the most urgent and critical thing that they're doing is not only collecting the data from the police officers, from the Highway Patrol, from all of the 287G qualified people in the state of Florida, they're collecting that information real time to know how much time, money, and effort are we spending in this? How many hours are spent during a encounter or work on this? Where did each encounter occur? Who was involved in each encounter? Did our federal partners actually follow through and take them in detention and deport them? All of that information, the plan is to put those up on transparent dashboards, because I know the governor likes to win, and the governor likes to keep score and not just engage in shiny object chasing. And by gosh, we're going to do every single thing we can because Florida likes to be the best and we like to compete. So we're going to keep track as best we can and have for any one of you to see how much time, money, and effort are we spending in this, what is the upshot of it, and if there are people that we're catching that are being released for whatever reason, why? What is the choke point? What is the friction point? The governor mentioned that there's between 70 and 80,000 of people, not just illegal aliens, but ones who have gone through all of the hoops of the due process that are out there somewhere in the state of Florida. So we're in a hole. We're going to dig our way out of it. It's an honor to have this job, Governor, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Master Sergeant Joshua Malloy. I'm the leader of the Troop C Criminal Interdiction Unit for the Highway Patrol. It's an honor to join you, Governor, Director Kerner, and Director Keefe for this press conference here today. I've served as a state trooper for the past 21 years, leading the Criminal Interdiction Unit in Troop C for the past 10, and more recently, the Troop C Strike Team. Prior to that, I served with the United States Coast Guard in a maritime interdiction capacity. The Criminal Interdiction Unit for the Highway Patrol is a nationally renowned interdiction team that uses 60 highly trained, specialized trained state troopers who serve statewide. Utilizing 30 apprehension and narcotics detection canines, special tools and equipment, and highly refined and specialized tactics, CIU troopers focus their efforts on interdicting drugs, illegal weapons, human smugglers, human traffickers, and other criminals and wanted persons that travel upon the highways and the roadways in the state of Florida. I found that the mission is always the same. The name of the operation is the only thing that changes. And none of that could be possible without the men and women that stand behind me here today. There's value in that. And Governor, we see that you've placed a value on that you've entrusted us with this mission, and that you value what we bring to the table, sir. Whether serving on the southern border or apprehending human smugglers and traffickers. We've been on the front lines to fight against illegal immigration for many years. Most recently, Governor DeSantis has directed the Florida Highway Patrol to participate in the 287G program with the Department of Homeland Security. This simply allows us to be cross-sworn with federal immigration enforcement powers. The Florida Highway Patrol is the first and only agency in the nation to be delegated these powers, although hundreds of agencies will soon follow and be delegated these important authorities. Director Kerner, you've been relentless in making sure Florida Highway Patrol is the tip of the spear in criminal interdiction and immigration enforcement, and the criminal interdiction unit be the leading force within the patrol. As much of the nation saw last week, Troop CCIU, along with Director Kerner, executed an enforcement operation in Tampa, resulting in the apprehension of 30 undocumented aliens in just over an hour's time. While this was the first operation to be featured on national news, it was part of a much larger effort where state troopers work either independently or directly with the federal government to enforce federal and state laws. Our partnership with local Tampa U.S. Border Patrol assets have been an effective teaming in this mission. During this operation, 3 undocumented aliens fled from one of our traffic stops and ran across several lanes of I-4. Myself, Trooper Kelly, and Trooper McKinstry gave chase, climbing a concrete wall, several barbed wire fences along the way, which resulting in me injuring my ACL. I forgot my age. Yeah. Which is the reason I stand before you today with assistance. Myself and Trooper Kelly was also injured as a result of the jump from the wall, continued to pursue the subject on foot, locating him a short time later with our air asset, hiding in a shed of a local residence. The criminal interdiction unit, in conjunction with my strike team, took the subject into custody, transported him to the county jail where he was charged with felony burglary, amongst other charges. As a veteran law enforcement officer and the leader of the Troop C criminal interdiction unit, we have seen firsthand negative effects of illegal immigration on the state of Florida and our communities. We have witnessed the massive amount of drugs and contraband being moved by cartels. We have recovered countless victims of human trafficking and human smuggling, and we have witnessed the sheer number of illegal aliens that have made their way to Florida in the previous 4 years. Governor DeSantis, we are honored to be the tip of the spear in this fight against illegal immigration. We remain committed to using our authority and skill sets in support of this mission. We know that you've entrusted and directed the Florida Highway Patrol to help build the model of state-led enforcement of immigration that can be exported to each and every state within the United States. We are thankful for your leadership and partnership that we have established with the United States Border Patrol and the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. And Master Sergeant, I understand age catches up with all of us. It reminds me of a little bit where I used to be not so long ago. But we appreciate what you do on a daily basis. Mr. Governor, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your continuing, relentless leadership. Standing up and fighting for what matters, it's not easy all the time. Having leaders who step in boldly and say, I don't care about the consequences. They'll talk about what's wrong, but I'm going to stand in between what's wrong and protect our people. That's why leadership matters. I want to talk about the troopers behind me. I want to talk about what they do on a daily basis to protect and preserve our communities. I also want to talk about their families. And I want to go on the record unequivocally, as always, as saying time, tools, training. You deserve all of the time, all of the tools, and all of the training you need to complete your mission, but more importantly, complete your mission and return home safely, because they are citizens just like us. When things go wrong, they run to the threat rather than stepping back, and that is what community leadership is all about. I talked briefly about the governor and his leadership, but let's talk about what this sounds like. Listen to what was just said by the speakers ahead of us. That is good government. Our federal government working with our state government, working with troopers in local communities and people around the state. Doesn't that sound like effective governance, like things going right, what we actually want from this? Isn't it a breath of fresh air to not have President Biden in the White House destroying this, breaking down our borders and putting our people at risk? Having a president to partner with bold leadership at the state level is what this is all about. Let's talk about immigration. Has anybody ever had a leak under their sink or a leak in their wall? You ever seen that? Water goes everywhere. Last time we had a leak, we found it in our kitchen, in our laundry room, in our bedrooms, everywhere. We had to rip out sheetrock everywhere. For those of you who have been in Florida for a minute, you might have had a flood or two, right? Because of hurricanes. Immigration's the same way. The true facts are this: every state is a border state. If we don't step forward and protect our borders and work with our government at the federal level, who else is there? If not me, then who? If not now, then when? We have a responsibility as we serve our community to step up and do what's right, not what's easy. That's why I was incredibly grateful to take the stand I did with the governor on immigration policy and each of the things we're working on now, because we know that leadership matters. Let's talk about judges. You heard that just a moment ago. We didn't elect judges. We didn't put them in place to be lawmakers. Lawfare is not lawmaking. We have legislators who do that. We have a governor who signs that. That process matters. It's incredibly important, and we're usurping power to a single person trying to dictate. That is not what government does. That is not what our founding fathers envisioned, and that is not the right thing to do. Again, grateful for Florida to lead on this. But what is the why? The why is this. It's each of you in this room, each of the people around our community, our districts, everywhere they go. We have a responsibility as Americans, as Floridians, heck, as moms and dads, to protect and preserve what we love for the next generation, because that's what our forefathers did for us. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to fail as a dad or a husband, certainly not as a senator, nor am I going to embarrass the people who run to the threat day in and day out. Sometimes it's a struggle. You see people equivocate, step down, step aside when the pressure gets too hard, too heavy. But friends, here in Florida, we beat to our own drum a little bit. And I hope, I pray, and I know that that will never happen, because what matters more than anything in this state is bold leadership focused on moral values, that moral compass that protects and preserves liberty for our generation and the next, and the next, and the next. And that is why we have leaders like Governor DeSantis, Dave Kerner, Hammer Hartzell. Across this, our troopers behind me. Thank you, God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Florida.
Well, thanks. I appreciate everybody's comments. Now, I just make a couple points. One, on the executive order that the president issued on Friday saying not longer than 60 days, you have state and local cooperation with the federal government. Just understand, that's the federal government inviting cooperation, but the federal government can't commandeer state and local entities. That's why what we did in Florida was so path-breaking and so important. Well, we made the decision as a state that our state and local entities would be on the team. If we had just sat on our hands, the federal government could come in and do what they are lawfully able to do, but they could not force any local government to assist with immigration enforcement. Now, we had a ban on sanctuary policies, so they couldn't sabotage it under state law, but they could have sat on their hands. So we've said you have a duty to cooperate, assist in the enforcement of federal immigration law. That's why we have the numbers that we've had. I don't know how many other states are going to do what Florida did. I think we have a good model, but it does require either having local law enforcement agencies that unilaterally want to be a part of the team, state agencies that want to do that, or you need to do legislation like we did to say the expectation is that everybody's on the team. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you know, everyone says it's National Police Week, so we celebrate people that wear the uniform. In Florida, there's a strong culture of supporting law enforcement. We have a strong law and order set of policies in the state, and that's important. And honestly, it's important to say that you support, because it is moral support, but you got to do more than just give lip service. You got to actually have policies that back up your commitment to law enforcement. And you look at what we've done in Florida, anti-riot legislation that made sure that you wouldn't have these mobs that would be able to target law enforcement. We did $1,000 bonuses 3 years in a row for every single sworn law enforcement officer in the state of Florida. We have a $5,000 recruiting program so that new hires can get $5,000 right off the top. And those are all important. And I'd say, looking at what I proposed this year, I know what Senator Collins and his colleagues in the Senate support is we need to give Highway Patrol a raise. We need to increase their salaries. First of all, they've earned it. First of all, they've earned it because they're not only performing the traditional duties, they were at the border for years. Now they're helping the feds in this, and I think ultimately the immigration operation is going to make some of their other things easier because I think you'll weed out, some of the problem elements, but still, it's a lot. And they're stepping up, and obviously it's not without risk. It's also just practically important. It's like some of these guys can do a lot of other things with their lives. They want to serve the people. And it's not that you do it only for money, but there may be options that would be better financially. And so we've got to be competitive on this. We also got to fund things like body armor. Why you defund that like some in the Florida House try to do is just beyond me. Why the Florida House rejected giving any pay increase for Highway Patrol. Again, it's just beyond me. That's something that's appropriate. It's something that is merited by the performance. So we don't just give lip service. We put our money where our mouth is. And I think you should expect any elected official, when they give you the lip service, make sure that they tell you or show you what they've done to back that up. Okay, we got any questions?
Governor, I got a real world example on all of this because, and I'm sure you recall this, in September 2022, Pinellas County Sheriff's Deputy Michael Hartman was killed on an extra duty assignment. His job was to protect highway workers, and instead he was killed by a highway worker who was here from Honduras, a man who had entered the country twice without proper documentation. So kind of a two-part question on this because of everything that you've mentioned. The company that hired him, it wasn't just him that was from Honduras, there were others on that work crew that were here without proper documentation. Can you do anything about that company that is hiring people who are not qualified to be here? Because you mentioned that you have a program making it easier to check documentation. And secondly, what about all the people that were on that work crew? Do you know if there have been efforts to find them and to deport them?
So the company was an out-of-state company that was responsible for hiring those folks. They are under federal investigation. So that is happening. Sometimes these things take a long time. It's our belief, and again, I'm not privy to what the feds have, but it's our belief that this is not just a one-off, that this was part of an orchestrated effort to bring in illegal labor into the country and then to get them into positions obviously at much cheaper rates, and so some of these companies could benefit. So I actually do think you are going to see, because it's interstate, that's the feds taking advantage of that. And yes, there have been investigations beyond that, not only in the feds, but also initially with the state. So I do think you're going to see some accountability. I think it's part of a larger issue, which is why you haven't seen maybe as much as we would thought at this point, but I do think you're going to see some pretty big busts down the line, and I don't think this is limited to this instance. I think this is pervasive throughout the country.
Governor, are you open to the idea of a budget summit, and do you think the state government is at risk of shutting down?
Well, I can tell you this. Since I've been governor, if you look at rainy day fund, compare when I came to now, we've almost quadrupled the state's rainy day fund. Debt owed by taxpayers. 180 years of Florida history. Since I came in, we've paid off 41% of it. We've done some of it early through our debt repayment program, saved taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. The budget we have right now, after my vetoes last June, is less than the budget that was the year before us. The budget I submitted recommendations is even less than that. And yet, even with the surpluses, even with the debt reduction, even with all those things, we have done major things like support law enforcement, like support transportation and road projects. I mean, you've seen stuff here in Tampa Bay that got done because we've really infused needed resources into that. Look what we've done with environmental restoration. Look at what we've done with Everglades restoration. I mean, this has been really, really huge. Look what we've done with education. And we've had more billions of dollars for teacher salaries increases. That had never been done in Florida history before. We've done it. So we have a formula that works. We have a formula that all these guys ran on and took credit for. A lot of this. And so, you can have a little junta in one house of the legislature all of a sudden to say, oh, no, they want to defund body armor for Highway Patrol. They don't want to give Highway Patrol a raise. They want to practically zero out Everglades restoration, that they want to defund effectively some of these ongoing highway projects. They can just say that, but that's not what they ran on. It doesn't make any sense. We have the lowest number of state employees per capita in the nation. So we've shown how it's done, how you can have surplus, how you can do tax relief, how you can pay down debt, how you can meet the needs that, since I've been governor, we don't do kind of, recurring programs that are going to balloon. Like that is not fiscally smart. But what we do when there are things that are needed, we go and we take care of them. So for folks, you don't need a summit to just keep doing what we've been doing. And I think if you look at my budget, we build off the success that we've had. I don't know what's gone on in terms of the breakdown. I wasn't a part of those negotiations per se, because quite frankly, the Senate and the House typically go back and forth on these things. But I can tell you, the voters want us to continue doing what we've done, to build off the success, to meet challenges that are before us, and to put their interests first. And I think what you've seen in the legislature, you've got some of these folks in the House leadership, they have a personal agenda. They have vendettas or petty. It's not being driven by strong policy, and they're trying to really deviate in a variety of ways. I get a kick out of some of these guys. The Florida House has voted to undo $60 million worth of spending reductions that I put into the budget last June, current year, with line item vetoes. They voted to undo that, including $57 million for themselves in the legislature. And then, so that as they do that, adding more to current budget, they then turn around and try to say the Senate has the spending problem. Well, you're the ones that are pushing to undo the spending reductions in current year. Why are you pushing to do that? So I think that they're just not doing what the voters sent them here to do, but it isn't like we're just writing on a clean slate. We're here after having done things that made Florida the #1 economy in the country 2 years in a row by both CNBC and by U.S. News and World Report. We're here having seen as federal debt owed to the public has ballooned over the last 6 years. In Florida, it's 41% lower. Your share of the state debt is like $400 per person. Your share of the federal debt is $105,000 per U.S. citizen. I mean, you couldn't see a stronger contrast there. I want to keep doing that. I mean, it's interesting. The debt repayment that we did, we have a surplus. Now, we've cut taxes, we've done infrastructure, we've done things that I think are appropriate, but one of the things we did is we did an accelerated debt repayment program, because what you can do, and our guys in the bond finance, they can get some of the debt at a discount, retire it, and then you end up saving on paying interest costs. So we've saved hundreds of millions of dollars in interest costs while retiring the debt earlier. I think it's good. I think we should expand it. I think the Senate is supportive of it. The House, they don't want to do any more debt repayment. They want to just stop, even though we know it'll save taxpayers hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And so, what I would say is, you've seen kind of what's been done. You've seen Florida have a lot of success. Just follow through with that and build off the success, and I think you'll end up in a good spot.
But when you go to the summit, though, the Republican parties ask you to come meet with Senate President Mulbritton and House Speaker.
With all due respect, though, that's not the role of the Republican Party of Florida. And so no, we're not going to do a dog and pony show. That's not the way this works. The way it works is people should do their jobs. Now, my role in the process is to sign or veto the budget as a whole, but also individual line items in the budget. And so there may be things that, I'll say, hey, this is something I'm going to be looking for. And obviously, I think the legislature needs to take that into account. But the reality is the House leadership has kind of careened off course the whole session, not just on the budget. Let's just be clear. This has been the whole session this has happened. The whole immigration, we're up here celebrating this, right? You will never find anyone running for office as a Republican that will go in front of a Republican audience and say that they oppose what we're doing. Yet the House leadership opposed it in January. The House leadership tried to do a de facto sanctuary bill in January. They thought you wouldn't notice it. They thought that they could somehow get away with it. And so that was really a sign that something's changed over there. They have the biggest Republican supermajority in the history of the state. And yet, what have the results been? We talk about things like woke universities and all that Florida has done to beat that back. They actually did a higher education bill to undo our anti-woke reforms. And I think it's not even a Republican thing. People don't want to fund a Columbia University that's off its rocker. We don't want universities to be about leftist indoctrination. We want it to be about what is a classical mission of the university, who's pursuing truth, who's preparing our students to be citizens of our republic. All the things that really I think can unify as what the effort should be. And so we've done a lot in that regard. Eliminate DEI, post-tenure review for tenured professors, all these different things. And yet the House of Representatives voted to kneecap our ability to continue on that course. We've done things like do litigation reform because Florida has a serious lawsuit culture. And when there's a lot of lawsuits that are filed, someone pays that, right? Because you could be totally innocent. Someone sues you. It is prohibitively expensive just to defend yourself. And so that adds to the cost of the economy. And it's honestly, as good as we've done, it's held us back. We did reforms in the last few years that have shown great promise. And the House tried to undo this. Now, the Senate killed it, and it's fine, but you just wonder what is going on. I don't know what got into the water. I think it's just the leadership is driving these guys in a poor direction. It's not the direction that their voters wanted. It's not what they campaigned on. And the note I always come back to, if you run on certain things and you get in and you do them, even people that may disagree, they will give you credit for, hey, you told us you'd do it, you did it. Where you get into trouble is when you run under, and they all ran on the Florida Success, Florida First policies, when you run on that, get elected, and then you try a different agenda, and an agenda that, quite frankly, tries to sabotage a lot of the success. That's where you really get into a lot of trouble. So I think that's what's happened, with the Florida House of Representatives, and so, we'll see what happens, but I definitely think that, that just looking at their whole session, it is not something to write home about, and I think it was because the choices were deliberately made to go in a different direction.
Back on immigration, the law enforcement accountability task force was set up talking about basically law enforcement agencies that don't adhere to the state's policies. Very few responses have been logged, or complaints have been logged onto that database. I'm curious, what is your response? What do you make of those minimal responses? And then of the complaints that have been logged, has any real action come from that?
Do you want to take that?
Sure, very briefly, yes, sir. The way that some call it a hotline, works is someone accesses it, they make a complaint, they put in facts, and it's curated by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, a division within the Florida Department of Law Enforcement who's looking at those facts to see if there's what's called predication for a more full investigation. And that is the process. It gets to me after the Florida Department of Law Enforcement does its preliminary inquiry and sees whether an expanded investigation is appropriate. So that's where that lies. I don't have any other information to share on where that is right now.
And what do you make of the minimal responses, that just very few complaints have been actually logged?
Yeah, I don't know what to attribute that.
I think we would just be guessing, but I think it's because we have legislation in place that basically says if you don't do maximum participation with federal immigration authorities, that can constitute a neglect of duty, which would trigger the governor's ability to suspend you from office. I think that's why you don't have as many complaints, because I think that there's a total disincentive for any law enforcement agency or a mayor to be flagrantly disregarding state immigration authority. If we didn't have that, you don't think we'd have some of these liberal mayors hot dogging? You don't think we'd have like some police chief in like a blue area? Of course they would be doing it. They're doing it in other parts of the country. But I think, and this is one of the things we wanted in the legislation, which is so important, there is teeth to this legislation. You can't sabotage. You can't just sit on your hands. Now, if you're a rural sheriff and you have only a handful of people, we understand like your maximum efforts may be a little bit different than Hillsborough County's maximum efforts or Lake County or something like that. But I think it's because you don't see flagrant disregard for Florida's legislation. And look, most of our law enforcement wouldn't do that, so don't misunderstand me. But I think you would have had pockets of either municipalities or agencies that would have taken a different posture. There's no incentive to do that right now. And I know we had some examples like Orange County. They said they were going to do sanctuary policy. Attorney General wrote them a letter saying, you ought to maybe consult the statutes in the state of Florida. And they didn't do the sanctuary policy. So I think that's probably the biggest reason why.
Governor, are you coming closer to appointing Lieutenant Governor or CFO?
Of course, every day that goes by, we're a little bit closer. I did say I wanted to get through the legislative session, see how the dust settled. Obviously, dust is still settling. Now, it doesn't mean at this juncture that I couldn't do anything before a budget gets laid on the desk, but I also just am mindful that there's still work to be done, and I just want to make sure that we kind of see that process through. But we will do it, and that will happen, relatively soon.
I just want to be clear, though, on the potential of a shutdown. Do you believe that there's enough negotiating happening to avoid that from happening?
Well, so our fiscal year starts July 1st. I can't imagine that it would come to that. I mean, what does that say? Again, we're not writing on a clean slate. Like, all you have to do is just copy and paste what's been done. Yeah, do a little flourishes on it, of course, but this is not like you're having to reinvent the wheel. This should not be very difficult to be able to do. If you're doing things that you didn't campaign on and that the voters have rejected, well, then that's painting yourself in a corner, and it may cause some more turbulence in the process. But if you just say, here's what we've done, let's continue on the successful path, then this shouldn't be very difficult for them to resolve. But, at the same time, people can make the choices that they want to make, and if you have people that are holding out for reasons that are not principled, I think voters are going to see right through that. So I don't think it makes sense substantively to go past July 1st, but I definitely think for the people that would be instigating it, I think politically it'd be really, really dumb. And our legislature, I mean, this is a part-time legislature. Most of these people have jobs. You're not giving them certainty about when you're going to kind of wrap any of this stuff up. And there's 120 members of the Florida House, and when are they going to have to be in or not be in? So, but here's the thing. We're gonna do what we said we'd do to the vote. What we said we would do when we told the voters our platform and to elect us on that platform. And I think that's true. I know it's true for Jay. I know it's true for a lot of his colleagues in the Senate. I think that's what even most rank and file House members want to do. But we are going to vindicate the promises that we made. If we said we were going to pay down debt, we're going to work to pay down more debt. If we said we're going to support law enforcement, we're going to support law enforcement. If we said we're going to support road projects and transportation to make sure that we don't get overwhelmed with even more traffic, we will do it. And honestly, the I-4 temporary extension we did in Polk and part of, that's been great, right? And there's a lot more to come on that, but I think people want to see us doing that type of stuff. They want to see property tax relief. I would not want to do anything that would foreclose our ability to do property tax relief for Florida residents. I think it's really important. I think it's a way we can alleviate burdens on, look, we've had an increase in home values, which some of that I think was just authentic demand to be in Florida over the years. Some of it was because we've had inflation overall in the economy, but, interest rates are still high. There's a lot of challenges. I mean, I took my mom and my wife and our kids for Mother's Day. After church, going to lunch, that was a lot. It was a tough bill. I mean, like, it's just the reality. I mean, like, I take my kids through the drive-through, at some of these places. And, used to be you could take kids through, maybe it's like $20, $25. It's hard to get out of some of these places for under $40 or $50 if you have a family, 4, family of 5. And so families are feeling this. People are working really hard. And whatever we can do to alleviate the burden, the best thing we can do, in my judgment, is to do property tax relief. And there's a whole conversation that's going to happen with that. But clearly, we cannot allow the idea of property tax relief to die and to be killed by actions of the Florida legislature. So stay tuned on all of that. I'm confident that it'll work out well for the people of Florida, just like this immigration stuff. It didn't need to go down the way it did. Like, we know we needed to do all this stuff, and so we eventually did it. It was a lot of gnashing of teeth, I think, for really no reason, but we landed where we needed to land and got the job done, and now we're leading the country. So I imagine that, there may be, a lot of somersaults along the way by some of these guys. There may be some gnashing of teeth for some people in the process, but I imagine we're going to land basically where we need to land as a state. And here's the thing, if there was a big outcry from the state saying that, you guys need to, take a radically different direction in what you've been doing, then I think people would be interested in hearing that. But that's not the case. I mean, people like the fact, that we are well-run, well-managed, and that we've been able to deliver on a lot of key things for the people. So, but these guys should get a raise. If you're for law enforcement and you don't want to give them a raise, then stop pretending that you're for law enforcement. This is merited, it's been earned, and I think it's what people want to see, and I know a lot of the people in uniform would appreciate it very much. Thanks, everybody.